So for the other pocket, we're going to use all of these prints. So for this one, I'm going to use this for the background of the front of my pocket. This one is going to be the inside liner of my pocket. This one is going to be the middle hexagon in our flower, and I'm using layer cake squares here because that's what I had, was a layer cake, this pretty Quilt Town layer cake from Missouri Star. And I just wanted to use all these pretty prints, but you can use a much smaller piece. It doesn't have to be a layer cake. And then I have 2 of these orange chuck prints, and those are going to be the outside hexagons of my flower. And like I said, you don't have to use 2 layer cakes, squares. You can use whatever you have that gives you enough to make the 6 hexagons. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to punch some hexies out of our double-sided fusible interfacing. I'm using Heat and Bond Light. So I've got here a 3-inch hexie punch, but you can use 2.5 inch or 2 inch, whatever you have. I wouldn't go bigger than 3 though. So you can see a couple of these here. We've still got the papers on one side and the shiny part on the other side. So we're going to keep punching until we get 7 hexies. So I've already got 2. So when you scroll over to punch your next one, make sure you can see the complete hexie shape here, because in this hole, because it's not useful to you if it's not a complete hexie shape. So it's 4, 5, 6, and I'm going to see if I can get one more right here. If I can't, I'll just cut a little bit more Heat and Bond Light. So if you look right there, I actually do have the complete hexie shape. I was just so thin on the end that it kind of pulled off. So that'll work, but if not, no big deal. It's not that hard to cut more. And I know it's tempting to cut these hexie shapes more than 1 layer at a time, but I would not recommend doing that. And the reason is that if you fold it so that the shiny sides are together, the pressure of the die cut will kind of make these shiny sides stick together, and it'll be a mess. And it just never really works all that well for me to cut it 2 at a time, even if I have the paper sides together. So it's quick, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make that much difference to cut it 1 at a time, and you're only making 7 of them. So what you'll do with these hexies is you're going to grab the squares of fabric, or scraps of fabric, whatever you're using, that you're going to be using for your hexies. And you're going to put 6 of them on whatever fabric you chose for the outside. And you want to lay these down so that there is at least a 1/2 inch leeway around each hexie. And you're going to lay these down so that the shiny side faces the fabric. So I can't quite get 6 on here without being too close, because I need a 1/2 inch around this one plus a 1/2 inch around this one. And that doesn't give me, so basically an inch, at least an inch between each parallel side there. So that doesn't give me enough room to put that 3rd hexie down. So I'm just gonna do 3 per square. Or if you want, you could do 4 per square and then just have more left over on your other one, however you want to do that. So that gives me a 1/2 inch I can cut around this one and still be able to cut a 1/2 inch around the others. And on the other one, you can put just 2, and then you'll end up with more of a scrap that you can use from this one. So you'll do that with these, and then you're going to go to your iron, and you're going to iron over this paper side to fuse that to this fabric that you're going to use for your outside hexies. And then we'll do with our other hexie, we'll do the same thing. With this last hexie, you'll fuse it, shiny side together, with the back side of whatever fabric, whatever square, whatever scrap you're using to have the center of your hexie flower. So, you know, I could use a piece pretty small, just as long as I have a 1/2 inch around the edges. So I'm going to fuse these, and I'll meet you back here. So now that we have all of our Heat and Bond Light hexies fused to the wrong side of our fabric, while I was at the iron, I went ahead and got my front pocket background fabric, and I made creases to divide that in quadrants. So basically, fold it this way, iron a crease, fold it this way and iron a crease. And what that's going to do for us is we're going to be able to see that crease line we made, and it's going to help us line up those hexies when we go to put them onto this background fabric. So you're just going to grab your scissors, and you're going to rough cut this fabric to about a 1/2 inch around your hexies. Now you can bust out your rotary cutter and your ruler if you want to, but I mean, sometimes it's a little easier just to rough cut it. These edges are not going to make an appearance. They'll be well hidden. And using this double-sided fusible web is going to allow us to make what looks like EPP, but we won't have to do any hand stitching to sew them together. So go ahead and cut those out, and I'll meet you back at the ironing board for the next step. All right, so now we're going to prepare our hexies. So I've got a few of them done here, and you can see on the back, papers are still intact, and we're going to get these hexies and show you how I do them. You're going to get these hexies, and you're just going to fold and kind of finger press a little bit, and then get your iron to press, and we'll just keep going around. And what that's going to do for us is it's going to make the hexie shape for us. At this point, we're not trying to fuse anything. We're just using the paper to help us as a guide to make this shape. And then once we get them all made, then we'll take the papers out and fuse them to the square that we're going to fuse them to. So I'm going to just show you one. So we're going to, like I said, finger press. I like to give it a little bit of steam. And then we just keep going around like that. Be careful not to iron your fingers. Sometimes I like to go kind of in the opposite direction, like here to there. That way I'm working with a part that is already cool to touch. And this doesn't have to lay down perfectly. We're going to fuse that and then sew the edges down once we get it onto our background square. Like I said, you won't have to use any hand stitches to sew these hexies together. So they're going to look just like they would look if you did English paper piecing, but you won't have to do hand stitching unless you just want to do some hand stitching to sew these down to your background of your front pocket. So that's what that looks like, and I'm going to finish these others, and I'll meet you back here to show you how to put these onto the background of your pocket. All right, so now that I have all my hexies prepared, we're going to attach them to our background square, and these crease lines that we made are going to help us line it up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take whatever hexie that you want to be in the middle, and we are going to fold that in half so that these points line up. So And you keep the paper in while you do that, because it'll make a nicer crease for you if you do. So fold that in half so it looks like this. And then you're going to remove the paper, and you will use that line to line up with this line, and or use point to point to line up with the other line. And then once you have your center line lined up pretty nicely, the others should line up nicely around it. So just make sure that your raw edges stay turned under. Then we're going to grab our iron. I'm just going to press that down and fuse that other side of the double-sided interfacing to this background print. And with that one lined up, you should be good to go. So now we're just going to start removing the papers and line the others up to the edge there. And fuse that. Now the part that is turned under won't fuse, but that's fine. We just want to hold that down so that we can go to our sewing machine, and then we'll sew around the edges, or if you want to hand sew it, you can do that too. But this is going to look just like English paper piecing without you actually having to do any hand stitches if you don't want to. We're just going to fit that in there. Now with this design, you want to have a 1/2 inch leeway around all the sides so that you have some leeway for your seam allowances that we're going to do when we put the pocket on. But, so we are cutting it kind of close with this, but that's fine, it'll still look cute. And if you have a 2.5 inch hole punch, you have plenty of room. And if you want to use glue on this part right here, on these tucked under seams, so that that can glue down to your background piece, that's fine. We are going to wash these when we're done anyway, to make some pretty fraying around the pockets. Just pressing those down so that they meet up. You can actually do this with quilts too. I do have a Grandma's Flower Garden quilt that is in the summer 2025 edition of Quilter's World, where I use this technique to put some hexie flowers on some blocks I made. All right, so now that those are all fused, we'll just go to the sewing machine and you're just going to sew around each of the hexies. And you can do that however you want to. You can do a decorative stitch, you can do a straight stitch, you can sew one and then tie it off if you want to, or you can sew one back, you know, sew back over your stitch line if you need to get the other one, whatever you want to do. So just sew these down, and then once you get them sewn down, you can make your pocket using the technique I showed you in another video that I'll link in this this description, and it's also in this same playlist. But I'll meet you back here and show you what this looks like once my hexies are also down. Okay, so here's my finished block. I've got all of these sewn down. I ended up just starting in the middle. When I got to where I started, I just cut over here, went around, cut over here to the other one, went around, then came back into the middle and sewed around here. Then you can do those two. And then you'll end up about right here, come back into the middle, and then over here, and then sew around the edges. So you can sew around the edges however you want to. You can even do a hand stitch if that's what you wanted, but this was a whole lot quicker than if I made this flower with traditional English paper piecing, where I actually had to hand sew all of these hexies together. So now that your block is finished, you can go ahead and make your pocket. And I do already have a tutorial for how to make this into a pocket to put on your canvas bag. So I'll link to that in the description.